Hello, hello. I am going live today just to chat about balance. I've gotten some questions about it and I just want to address them here because a lot of what I see online and what I even taught like a decade ago in the yoga and fitness space is very different than what I do now because of what I've come to understand and how I kind of look at things, what I know about the feet. And so I want to just offer some like simple things that get profound results because balance is a thing that happens when our visual, vestibular, and proprioceptive systems like work together. And when they come together in unison, we have really great balance. So yeah, that's what we're going to chat about. So I'll give people a couple minutes to join me live, and then I'll just start running through stuff. If you have questions as they come up as we're going, just shout them out, type them in the chat so I can answer them. One question that I definitely had from somebody coming here is like working with things like vertigo or tinnitus, diseases that impact the inner ear, the vestibular system. And all of this applies to that. So, hey Marlene, okay, so let's go. So the first thing I want us to kind of dig into is the foot, because at the end of the day, when we are talking balance, generally we have both feet on the ground or a foot on the ground. And that foot isn't just inert and on the ground because we always have forces like gravity and ground force reaction acting on us. So the foot isn't just static. So the first thing to kind of understand is when I conceptualize the foot, and this was during a webinar years ago, and when I kind of saw the foot this way, it really changed how I think about things and how I instruct things. So our foot, so this is a right foot, it's been stripped down. So you'll see lots of modeling with this online that is like, has this on a surface and is like, we hit the ground and then the shin goes forward and they're flattening this out. I've been to a number of cadaver labs and spent days just dissecting a lower leg and a foot. And the amount of strapping that and connective tissue that is around all these bones, it is very hard. It takes multiple scalpel blades to get this stuff apart. So that was the first thing that challenged my thinking, because yes, we have joints in the bones in our skull too, but we don't want those suckers like shifting around. So there is a little bit of movement between these bones, but not a ton, especially these guys here, okay? They're very tightly bound. But when you look at this right foot, the heel is back here, okay? And toes are out this way. So this is big toe, pinky toe. You'll notice that the toes, the big toe, the second toe, the third toe, they all have, the metatarsal bones all have their own cuneiform bone. These three bones, okay? The fourth toe and the pinky toe share the cuboid bone. So they only have one. So when I look at this, and I also look at this navicular bone here then, it marries up to the talus, but the cuboid bone over here, the cuneiform, I always get it screwed up, it matches up to the calcaneus. So I kind of see that we have 2 feet within our foot. We have 2 feet within our foot. So let's just kind of explore that concept just for a second here. So the first thing I'm going to invite you to do, the other number one thing that I get people ask me about is they come and see me and are thinking they want to work on their balance because they notice that they can't put, their underwear or pants on in the morning anymore standing up. They lose balance going to that single leg, okay? So that's kind of the move I'm going to invite you to do right now is mime just putting on your pants in the morning, your underwear, the way you put it on, okay? Try to do it standing up. So if you normally sit on the edge of the bed and then do one leg and the other, there's nothing wrong with that. But a lot of people start to become concerned about their balance when they feel like that isn't something they can do, or that they can, slip the heel of their shoe standing on one leg, that they have to go down onto a knee and get their shoes on. Okay, so just mind that, give that a try. Then what I'm gonna invite you to do is I want you to just pick a foot, okay, have a look down in it, have it under you. So don't have it under what you think is your hip or your shoulder. Kind of line it up so that there's a sense of almost like your heel is under your butthole. If you dropped a plumb bob, it's like the plumb bob would kind of drop just behind your heel from that butthole. The other foot is just kind of kickstanded behind that one, okay? Now, what I want you to do is from that heel, I want you to extend out like a greater than sign straight along the floor. The big toe, the first, right, and the second, or the fifth, sorry. Think of them going out long, and you can even do that with that same hand, them extending out long, like a foot, 2 feet longer than they actually are. Okay, so you've got this long first MTP, this long fifth MTP, okay? And then again, stand on that foot leg. Mime putting your leg through your pant leg or underwear hole, okay? And just that concept of these longer, not all your toes, first and fifth, okay? First and fifth. We don't want to push the toes into the ground. So the other thing is when you go to remove that other leg, notice what your toes do. See again if this idea or this concept of just having the toes out long. And you can do it with your hand, because what you do with your hand will kind of be imbibed down into the foot, okay? And then switch sides. So again, think heel, kind of roughly under butthole. You just remove the other leg, okay? I'll back it up. Just remove that other leg and think of that fifth MTP and first MTP just getting long. So now the next thing I kind of want to talk through is toes and MTPs. The reason we don't want to involve toes is because the big toe has 2 joints, this joint and then this joint, okay? All the other toes have 3 joints, okay? They've got a joint, a joint, a joint. There's a lot of joints in the toes. We don't want to deal with them, okay? So just think, you don't want your toes interacting with the ground because there's too many joints. Where we want to interact with the ground are the ends of these metatarsal bones, the toe end of this metatarsal bone. Not the space between this end and the toe, but right here. And the reason is these bones are designed for that because you can't really see on this one, but they have sesamoid bones at the end, which picture 2 like pencil leads that are embedded in connective tissue underneath this bone that kind of let those bones distribute pressure by rolling. So if I even think of standing on that one leg to put my pants on, and I work that rolling action of, say, my big MTP joint, like the big toe MTP, end of that MTP, not the toe, okay? Very different than if I say, go to put my pant leg on. I want you to spread the ball of the foot, press the tips of the toes down into the ground. As soon as I press the toes down into the ground, that gets me off this MTP joint. And these are important because the pressure that goes there is what sets up what happens in this midfoot and in the ankle. So if you're trying to stand and your toes are gripping, trying to hold onto the ground, again, a foot isn't a hand. Their structures have developed and are very different. We want to try to think of getting the toes out of the way. For some of us, that might be thinking of just letting them be long. For some of us, that might be actually kind of a quality of bending toes 1, 2, and 3, one direction, and or toes 4, 5, a direction, that help us find balance on that leg. Okay? In terms of the vestibular system, okay? That inner ear, if when I go to a single leg, my tendency is to go up, right? I'm really concerned about if this goes to the ground, I'm gonna get hurt. So if I'm gonna go to a single leg, typically, and again, when you watch runners, you'll see they're up when they're in the air. When they hit the ground, things fold. So again, this idea of, okay, I'm going to put my pants on in the morning, I'm going to be much better served by vestibular system, especially, so if you suffer from vertigo, tinnitus, things like that. Just this practice and going up and down stairs during your day can make a huge difference. When I go to remove a leg, I don't want to stand up on this leg. I want to remove this leg and sit down on this leg. The vestibular system doesn't get as aggravated. So when I'm hiking and I'm going downhill, the vibrations and every time I hit the ground feels so much better, and my system can work with those collisions as I sit on that leg. I don't hit and try to stay straight on that leg because then I get vaulted up and through the air again, which the vestibular system's like, yo, I don't love that, okay? So just even thinking about going upstairs or a single leg balance through your day, have this idea of when I'm going upstairs, instead of step, stand, right? I'm going to have this leg. I just want to remove this leg. Boom. I'm going to sit down on this one. Then I switch it. This one goes on to the next stair. Sit down on it. Okay? So bringing in this concept of if I'm going to go to a single leg balance, instead of trying to stay really straight on that leg when I go to put my pants on, I gotta sit down on it. I have to bring my upper and lower bodies together. Okay? That will make a huge difference. Instead of trying to stand up tall on a leg. The other thing, lots of people in balancing classes, the focus becomes on this idea of standing on this leg. We spend all this work like getting this stance leg really strong, and then we're like trying to remove the other leg. But part of the problem is if this foot stays close to the ground this whole time, my system is going, where am I putting the weight? Where am I putting the weight? Where am I putting the weight? It's going to want to, there you go. It's going to want to get me to the other, is that better? Can you see my legs and feet now? It's going to want to get me to the ground quicker. A way you can kind of play with this is, again, in yoga context, I'm thinking about especially, if I were to something like tree, and some of you might be spending a ton of time thinking of trying to keep this leg straight, squeeze, hold everything in, okay? And then they're trying to remove this leg. I have just kind of taken away the joints of this leg's ability to work and dampen those vibrations and work with those vibrations. Where again, if I let myself sit on this leg, those changes in the foot, those vibrations, the joints can work with it. Now my hip is at play much more than my ankle, okay? Also then, if I focus on this, the height of this leg, if I get this leg up, I get a lot more strength out of this leg than if I keep this foot down here. Because my visual and vestibular system is already going, okay, like when are we going to the other leg? Because it's close to the ground. That's what it's anticipating. Whereas if I get on this leg and get this leg up high, this leg feels solid. It feels strong. So again, what I get out of this leg, sometimes in a class, we spend all of this time cueing the stance leg. We need to play a little bit. What are you doing with the removed leg? How is what you do with this removed leg, how is it impacting that stance leg? And then I then come into my tree pose. Rather than all of this stuff, find the tripod of the foot, make the ball of the foot wide, spread the toes, plant the toes. Now you're gonna remove this leg. I just made it so hard for myself to stand on this leg. Everything's gonna feel very, very wobbly, okay? Any questions? A couple of you that are on. Yes. The rotations of the leg. I don't know how much I want to get into that because that's a whole other can of worms, and so many people think of this idea of like internal, external rotation. So more just getting people to go from this idea of having a straight column and trying to balance on it to fold up that column, sit down on it. Yeah, is where I would start. And this idea too of like the foot, it's a short lever in comparison to the stuff above. So for some of us, again, thinking of getting long from the first and the fifth MTP bones, if I take those metatarsals and think of extending them out like a protractor, the angle's on a protractor, all of a sudden I've got a lot more balance. Get your toes out of the way. The other one I get the question lots of is things like lunges, or where we go from standing into like a high lunge or crescent or things like that. And often the only thing that's offered if this feels unbalanced is to be on train tracks. I've said it, okay? Here's the problem with that, or why you might want to consider something different. And the reason is I hike a lot, and there's lots of times on the trail that the trail isn't going to allow me to be on train tracks. And I am going to be on a single leg, right? So I want to work from this place of single leg. And can I get balanced on that single leg? So even a drill or a balance, or this idea of if you're going to come into some of those balancing poses in yoga, I come here, I'm going to lift this leg. Now I'm going to add that collision. So I'm going to drop this leg, which automatically has me take this leg higher, and I'm going to find that balance pose. For lots of people, that'll feel better. Some of us are going to need to think, this foot's in the air, get long. Out that first and fifth MTP. Get long, okay? As I land on that leg, I don't want my toes to hit the ground. If I'm going to go from here to something like step forward in a lunge, we'll do that first. I have to get somebody out of the way. So I think of the fact of, okay, let's play with this idea that we're going to end up in that taking a step forward. So let's take a step forward. Let's not lift this leg very high. So let's just lift this leg, step it forward. Okay, it comes to the ground pretty quick. So the only change you're going to make is you're going to take a step forward. I want you to keep this foot in the air as long as possible, or at least longer than you did that last time. Lots of us just keeping that foot in the air longer, we actually find a better distance for ourselves. It keeps this stance leg holding us up longer until this foot comes to the ground. And for lots of us, that will feel much more balanced and be much more useful now when I'm out on the hiking trail than telling me to take my feet train track distance apart. Because if what I'm training for has that not be a viable option, then have you really helped me? Okay, any other questions? I've covered that remove leg, kind of then what you get out of that stance leg, vestibular system. Okay, let's do another just kind of exploration with the feet. Because there's lots more that can be done in classes that really benefit us that I don't see being done. So again, I want us to focus on this end of our MTP, metatarsal phalange bones here, okay? So not the toes, but if you lift your toes up, you'll feel how that part goes down. And if you take the tip of your toes and kind of press them into the ground, you'll feel how that bone, those bones kind of lift off the ground, okay? We want to get where toes can just be long and we can kind of have our weight shift from our heel to that end of the MTP and this sense of the MTP pitching down into the ground as I remove that other foot, okay? And just kind of notice, do you get more pitch or pressure into the first? Can you get pressure to the second, third, fourth, fifth? Some of us, let's work that fifth for a second, and specifically we have this notch. So if you go to the narrowest part in front of your heel, that bony protrusion on the outside is that notch of the fifth. So play with, as you do that weight shift, can you, and you can do this with your pinky finger, that's the notch of that fifth, can you roll that up as you shift weight from the heel to the MTPs? Think of the toes just getting long and out of the way. Kind of like when you push the lawnmower, your toes are like the lawnmower. They're just staying out of the way. Okay, now this time as you shift that weight, instead of rolling the fifth up, roll the fifth down. What does that change? Instead of rolling the fifth up, roll the fifth down. Okay, now whichever one gave you kind of the ability to shift that weight, either rolling it up or rolling it down, do that. And then just lock it neutral once you get there. See how that feels, okay? Once I'm on this leg, you know, it's not that I can't straighten it, I can, but we do want to work that ability of us to fall the torso, for us to topple the column, sit down on that leg, rather than thinking of this weight shift, or when we remove a leg, that we're straight on this leg, okay? Let's do that on the other foot. So again, just shifting the weight from the heel to the ends of the MTP bones, and just think toes are long. If your toes were long more, it'd be like when you push it in the yard, toes just get out of the way. They just get out of the way. They don't. But notice, some of us might find as that weight shifts, our toes have a tendency to want to hit the ground. See if you can work with that heel, and as that weight shifts, toes get out of the way. That might require some of us to think of the toes bending one direction or the other, or that the toes kind of 1 through 3 and 4, 5, almost like the Vulcan hand grip, that they split. So as you come through, this sense of where that foot split is, you split. But that we're on the end of those MTP bones rather than on the toes or the joints under the toes. So I did lunges. The other thing with lunges too is I kind of think about it because, again, hiking, trail running of any sort becomes a single leg balance activity. I don't have 2 legs on the ground. So I want to, again, be working my balance in a way that translates to that. And again, I'm not typically running, and when I hit the ground, only ever doing it on a straight leg. I can. It gets very fast and out of control if I'm linking 4 or 5 of those together though. So we've got to also have the ability to yield when I land on that leg and let the column topple and be balanced there. So again, if I'm going to be putting my pants on in the morning and going on one leg, I want to fold up. Yes, it does. So again, when the legs fold up, then the torso acts much more like a unit versus the spine trying to figure out, again, all those joints, which again, if my nervous system is tracking movement in all of these joints, it's tiring. So I want to know how to set things up that actually have me utilizing fewer joints or kind of controlling tension across the joints in such a way that there's less that the system has to sort of surveil. Okay, so balance done on a balance pad, I'm not a fan. Here's why. I've done it, and you can do it. The problem comes is most people's feet are just, and having dissected feet and seeing the strapping in them, most people's feet, they just don't move at all. Or they have very particular patterns of what they do in their feet. And when I'm out on the trail and on the ground, like, yes, sometimes that ground is like mossy, okay? But again, I'm going from foot to foot. I'm not in the forest standing on one leg, which is why I wouldn't probably do balance training like standing on a pad on one leg. I might do something where, again, I'm setting up 2 pads, say, and I want to work some of these concepts and see what happens when I'm on that balance pad, and I go from a single leg to 2 legs, right? But lots of this stuff that's like stand on one leg, and then, but again, if I'm keeping this foot close to the ground, my system the whole time is going, when am I shifting? When am I getting on that other leg? So again, if I'm going to do some of that clock type work on that stance leg, I'm probably gonna do it with the intention of playing with the height of this removed leg, right? Okay, I've got a giant clock face. Can I get to that number and then remove my other leg? Because that's going to translate to what I'm doing out on the trail, hiking, when I'm chasing my kids, right, who are now teens, and really I'm trying to keep up with them on the rugby field. But so does that answer your question? That's kind of my thought. But no, I wouldn't just stand on a balance pad. They can be useful because they can help people sometimes find that pressure into the MTP joint. Sometimes based on the pattern that's going with the foot though, they just kind of sink into where they naturally get pressure, which lots of times is the toes. And once the weight is on our toes, it makes it very hard because there's just so many more joints that get involved. And so we kind of just fight. We just kind of just fight there. It kicks in the ankle way too much, and the hip doesn't get to do its work the same way. Yeah, good question. But I might use it, again, just to see what someone does on it. But I find more people are actually better with like a porous surface. I use like the cork yoga blocks rather than a foam yoga block, helpful. We have a water reservoir near us. So whenever I see kind of interesting pieces of driftwood's really lovely because it is soft and porous and has fine and interesting texture. That's the other thing is like our fingertip tips and prints, the skin on our feet has that. And sometimes we think we need to be on things with bigger nubs, and really our foot is more sensitive than that. So getting on different parts of that foot, and even thinking that idea, like those sesamoid bones underneath the end of the MTP joint, the MTP bones, that gives that end of that bone really some interesting abilities. So just playing with getting on different part of my feet and the rolling or working of those bones, you'd get more out of than like standing on a pressure pad. Most people I find actually really struggle with being able to get downward pressure without also bucking themselves off the other direction. So it's keeping myself compressed or folded is where most of us need the work. Okay, all good. I'm gonna run, giving you lots to think about. Shoot questions my way. I do have a whole self-paced, really awesome foot course that gives you like lots of practice with this stuff, expands on what I've shared here. You get a great PDF so you understand some of these concepts in some different ways. You can work with moving things. Yeah, okay, bye. Boop.